Hello everyone. My name is Nushir Contractor. I'm here because Brian and C ended up going to the regular NICO place and was supposed to do an introduction. But I'm totally delighted to be able to make this introduction because I've had a chance to know Diego for a few years. I first met Diego when he applied to go to grad school here at Northwestern. Very lucky, despite many competing PhD offers at a variety of different universities. He ended up choosing to come to Northwestern and also got his PhD in the Technology and Social Behavior program, the joint program between School of Communication and Computer Science. I was very lucky to have Diego be part of the Sonic research group that I'm involved with here. And I was very pleased that even though he graduated in the midst of the pandemic, he had an opportunity to both get a job offer at Notre Dame, but also while waiting to actually move there, he had the distinct honor of having to do a postdoc with our own Dashan Wan. So he now, of course, is appointed for computer science and equipment school at Notre Dame. I'm going to end this introduction by saying a couple of, giving you a quiz. So are you ready for a two truths and a lie? You all ready for this? Two truths and a lie. Okay. Before becoming a professor, Diego taught web technologies at a university nestled between the Andes and the Pacific. That's one. The second one is Diego's postdoc involved decoding how teams of robots could socially network better than humans. And three, he once co-designed a team formation tool that helped journalists cover breaking news faster than Twitter. That's what I could ask you. Do you know which one is the truth and the lie there, or you're not sure?
I don't know. Oh, yeah, let's do the part. Let's see.
So again, how many of you think that the first one, which is before becoming a professor, Diego taught web technologies at a university nestled between the Andes and the Pacific? How many of you think that is true? Okay. Okay. Diego's, how many of you think that's a lie? Everyone else thinks that's a lie? Okay. Diego's postdoc involved decoding how teams of robots could socially network. How many of you think that's a lie? Okay. And the last one is they co-designed a team formation tool that helped journalists covering breaking news faster than Twitter. According to ChatGPT, it's just the one I used to put your bio into ChatGPT, and I said, ask ChatGPT to come out with two truths and a lie. It claims that the second is a lie. If you didn't, your postdoc did not involve decoding how teams of robots could socially network better than humans. Right. No robot socializers in his postdoc yet, though his real work on team formation is truly futuristic. Oh. There you go. Welcome, Diego.
Thank you for the introduction. I guess the first one is true, given that I'm originally from Chile, so Andes, so somewhere between the Andes and this. So yeah, all right. Thank you all, and thanks for coming here. I know there are a lot of things on this campus, so I'm very happy, and also to see all faces, good friends here, and I'm charmed being Northwestern, especially NICO. So thank you again, Brian, who will show up in a few minutes. But yeah, thank you for inviting me. And it's good for me to present this. I will show some of this preliminary work that we have been doing. It's under review in the journal, so hopefully we will get good comments. And I want to start first, given the knowledge trends, because I think this work is based on a team effort. So I want to start recognizing Nandini Banerjee, which is a third new PhD student in our program. She has done a fantastic job leading this project. Also, people who have been mentoring us and guiding us for this analysis, Professor Wong, who he also has started this line of research, and also some colleagues. Yan also was a postdoc here at Northwestern, and Professor Leo Chema, who also guide us and give us feedback about this one. And last, I want to acknowledge their sponsors, National Science Foundation, our friend Sloan Foundation, and Amazon Science, who have been supporting this work. So I will structure this presentation in 4 parts. Feel free to ask questions if you want. I want to start with the motivation of this problem show you what we have found, and also we have worked on trying to identify some explanations of these results, and we will conclude with the discussion of future work. So I remember this paper came out in 2018, and I remember because I was actually at Summit. So the announcement came out, like professor from Kellogg released this paper. Lynn Fable, who at that time was a postdoc working with James Evans in Chicago, and the idea here is like they identify this interesting construct about how teams could disrupt science. So they published this paper in Nature. Right now it has more than 1,000 citations. And the question here is like how we can identify researchers who are transforming our knowledge boundary. So the question here is how we can identify scientists who are creating new fields or subfields of knowledge. And from there, we are just seeing new discoveries in science. So they use this metric called disruption. And the idea here is like to measure to what extent we are moving apart from existing knowledge and just creating new ones. And I like this idea of like creating a new direction. So right now, scientists are moving from one way to another. And you see many transformations and innovations follow this pattern. Right now, we're talking about transformers, right? We're talking about self-attention, right? Papers that were published no less than 10 years ago, but now a lot of people are working on that theme. So how they operationalized disruption here, if you see here, the main idea is that you have a paper, this focal paper, and the question here is like, how is this paper embedded in the network of citations? So papers cite other papers, and the question here is like, what happens with all the papers that come after this one? So are they starting putting all the attention to this focal paper, or once they cite this focal paper, they also need to refer to the papers that became after that, right? So the idea here is like, it's a simple calculation to see. And you see here the colors, basically papers that are citing just your paper, which are those red papers. Sorry, the green ones. The green ones are just citing this focal paper and then omitting what happened before that. You have the red ones, which they need to cite both, like the focal paper and then the previous ones that were cited for this focal paper. And the last one, just like the other papers, which are the black ones, K, which are all the papers that are citing the references, but then not acknowledging this new knowledge. So based on that, we create and compute this calculation called disruption, which ranges from -1 to 1. And the idea here is like you see, a lot of the disruptive work here is just like creating new venues of research. And those are somehow related to Nobel Prize articles. They're disruptive, creating new venues of research. This is the BTW model, which kind of describe a lot of like how the power law distributions existed. So they presented this idea like the self-organized critically distributions, and that came up from nowhere. Like the authors of this, they are like the acronyms of the 3 authors here, and they came out with this paper, which was very popular, and then basically created from little knowledge previously, and then a lot of papers started like referring to this. And now on the other side, you have developmental paper, which is just like papers or work that is building from other work previous, and there you see in theory and a lot of like social sciences that needs to have and build from previous theories. And then there are some examples here. For example, review articles, because we are citing articles before that, and it's still very important for the field. And one example here is the Bose-Einstein paper condensation article. This one, basically, they took both models, Bose-Einstein condensation, because at that time they were just like theoretically formulated, but they were not validated or tested. So this article, what they did is like they cited these 2 models and then they tested it empirically. So every time that everyone is citing this paper also needs to refer to those 2 models. In that sense, it's building on previous knowledge, and both are super important for development science. So what we know right now is just like some factors that explain why disruption happens. So this paper that I was just introducing, large to small teams, and that was one, and they found out that small teams are more likely to be more disruptive than larger teams. And it's just because how the infrastructure of science works, like small teams have more opportunities to discuss ideas, they can just start from early stages, and then when the idea starts building, they need to add more researchers, and that's when it starts becoming more developmental, because they're trying to add more extensions or like continue that line. Also, team hierarchy, they know that flat teams usually are more disruptive, and the same because they have these norms in terms of who can speak, who can contribute, just like those are more blurry, and that facilitates the creation of more ideas. This was a recent paper, also by Link Wei. Basically, this paper, they discovered that the remote teams were less disruptive than scientific teams working colloquially. And then they tested this with, they operationalized the distance where the scientists were, and they found out like teams that were like close together, they were more likely to generate disruptive papers. And the last one is freshness. They also know that involving people who are senior, juniors, they know that they have more chances to create disruptive work. And that is also based on the composition of the group, just like by swapping or just like by having people who are in their junior stages, that also increases the likelihood of having more of recent ideas. So based on what we know, we have this motivation of understanding gender composition could be also an explanation or that could affect how scientists could disrupt science. So we have some ideas here, and then this is kind of motivation. Like we know from previous work, and this is from Anita Willis, like the work in collective intelligence, that teams that have high proportions of women often exhibit greater collectives. And again, it's just based a little bit with these ideas of the social dynamics that happen in different teams. Usually the norms in female-led teams are more equal, horizontal compared to what happens in most of the male majority teams. Also, we know that gender diverse teams tend to produce more novel ideas. This is the paper that Brian and Jan published a few years ago. So that was also another idea, just like why we should study this problem. Also, there's some evidence that female researchers tend to engage more with interdisciplinary problems, which could lead to create new venues for research. And the last one, which is something that we have seen previously, for example, Professor Ms. Farley from here, she has been working on this idea of to what extent scientists who are female are recognized as they should. And we know that usually female researchers tend to receive less credit or authorship than male, and that happens in different fields and so on. So we wanted to see, in that sense, if disruption could be something separate from this kind of patterns. So we work on this, and I'm sorry that Ashwin is not here, but like, because he provided this very interesting data set called SciSciNet, which is a combination of different data sets. The one is like Microsoft Academic Graph, which includes papers, the references, the authors, and a lot of the information. And what they did, and what's interesting, is like they identified the gender of each one of the authors. They use this method called the cultural consensus theory, which is based mostly like identify the first thing when trying to infer and give a probability if this person is male or female. And gives a probability, ranges from 0 to 1. So we're trying to use these papers and trying to identify the teams, and they compute the disruption scores, which were about 40 million papers. We also took the data sets from the patents, and we'll discuss the problems with this. But yeah, patents also, we're trying to interest in this kind of behavior for just like, not just for papers, also for inventions. So we extracted the patents using from the USPTO, where all the inventors need to disclose and register the inventions to the government. And then we analyze the patents there based on trying to identify the gender of inventors. And the idea here is like we analyzed the most disruptive papers, similar to that paper of the small large teams. We try to identify the top 5%. So in a diagram, basically what we did here is like took both papers and patents. We identified the gender of each one of the members of these teams. And we started with setting like if the probability of being a female was under 50%, it was a male, of all of that was female. We also did some validation with more strict thresholds, and just to be that the results were consistent. And based on that, we took all the authors and tried to computed to what is the percentage of female in the team from 0 to 1. And then the idea here is to compare to your specific brand, like how many papers were disruptive compared to all the papers that the scientific teams created in that particular tier. So I'm going to share the results here and a little bit like cross-validation, some robustness checks, and then I will jump into some potential explanations. So the first thing that we discovered was that, in fact, over the years, all female teams are more disruptive compared to 50% balanced teams and also more disruptive than male teams. So over the years, you see here from 1950 until 2020, they have created more disruptive work compared to the other team compositions. In terms of numbers, by 2018, the proportion of high disruptive work produced by all female teams was 24%, and 46% larger than all male and 50% teams respectively. We did this to not just like the streams, wanted to see if we can just see some specific percentiles. So we have all male, majority male, and that we were ranging from 20 to 40% female, 40 to 60 female, and so on. And we found this interesting relationship is that it's not like linear, like adding more women to the team doesn't make it more disruptive. It's just like this kind of majorities you can see here. The higher one that goes up, that red line, is just teams that have female researchers, mostly are female researchers. Then you have all these teams who are male dominated, and then you see that the balanced teams are just like under the line. So what that was interesting to see in the sense like consistency, female majority teams have created more disruptive work compared to the rest, and also by 2019, the female majority teams have produced 20% higher disruptive work compared to male teams. And I'll show you here that what we found is like this is non-linear. So not by adding one woman to your team makes it more disruptive. We tried different combinations in which we have all female teams, and then what happens if we replace and put one male? And we just calculated an average, and you can see that the disruption scores on average for these teams goes down. So just by changing this majority, it changes the disruption scores, but it doesn't work also in the other way. So if we have all male teams, by adding a female researcher, also the disruption scores decrease. So in that sense, I think what explaining here is like there's some rules or norms that the majorities can control. And in that sense, when we have all the people from the same gender, probably the dynamics are different.
Does that depend on role on the team? You know, the PI versus a middle author? Did you look at that?
Yes, and I will show you.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Good question.
Diego,
Right.
I apologize.
No, that's okay.
I didn't know you were working on this. This is fantastic. Did you, there's been a lot of criticism about the disruption between 15, 20 papers.
Yeah.
All, pointing to weaknesses in the measure. Some go as far as to say it's poor. Did you talk about that? Did I miss that?
I put in the limitations, but yeah, I acknowledge that because even what the metric means, because I know there are so many ways to game with the metric, right? Because if you cite less, your disruption scores can go higher because there is no chances like for this kind of like outlier thing.
What do you mean by cite less?
So because how the metric works out is just like compares how many papers are cited the total one and then going back in time. So like if, for example, a paper has cited 100 papers, the chances that other papers will also cite those references is super high. That increases a lot.
So you're saying the length of the reference list?
Yes. And actually, that's kind of like we're seeing here. I mean, I know there are very extreme cases like there are papers who have 10 references, and that makes the paper disruption scores overall. So I noticed that this metric has a lot of flaws, including like the distribution of it. Like I think, like also, we were talking about this, but basically like the distribution goes like this, right? It's just like everything is like centered on zero, and there's just like a few papers on this. But yeah, I totally understand. That's a fact.
So if I could just follow up, what have you done to incorporate those criticisms into the interpretation of your results?
What we have been trying to do. Yeah, so good question. So what we're trying to do here is like we're trying to use different formulations of the disruption scores because they have a few ones that are trying to acknowledge those flaws, just like to incorporate or like to reduce the weight of if you're citing a lot, your disruption score goes down by a lot. So how you can mitigate that? So there are versions that have the normalized disruption. So right now, what we're trying to work on is just like how if this analysis persists even when the disruption formula changes, right? So,
So you're trying to address some of these criticisms as to develop those.
yes,
Can I have one quick follow-up?
correct.
It's like, so the big thing with this disruption index for anybody who studies science is that they claim that science has become less and less disruptive.
Yes,
So how does that work with Russia?
I have a
I
appendix.
know it's getting less disruptive, women have a higher percentage of the toilet papers that are disruptive.
Yeah, let me show you. And again, I like to keep it conversational, so that's great. Let me see if I can jump quickly to slide. Here.
I think you must have shared. Oh,
There you go.
Yeah.
So that question is true, and actually we were asking the same question. Supposedly disruption is going down, but these plots are going up. Right? The thing here is like we're calculating the top 5. So in that sense, it's still like the proportion is still going up. When it's going down, it's just like if we just take all the papers in that paper of the disruption goes down, they use any paper that have a disruption score that was possible. So we did this in analysis, and you can see that it still is going down. Like over the decades, disruption is going down. Which I think part of this like we cannot ignore what happened before, and then probably there was not much to cite. But here you see here like the women work, it's just like it's going down too, but like the slope is just less pronounced compared to male and 50%.
Does that mean?
What happened in 2000?
2000?
Yeah, it looks like 3 trends to me,
Yeah, like that's going up and down.
and it's since 2000.
Yeah, that's what-
Everything became digitized, and now we have a proliferation of journals and papers, and it's impossible to keep track of these papers, and now everyone cites the same Nature review articles and all of their things.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And does it mean that we are actually overfunding science?
No.
I mean, the return on investment seems to be going down.
Might be using the wrong metric though, if we're saying citations and papers, right? Because not all are created
You
equal.
don't actually mean that, right?
No, but I'm asking.
You're,
it-
that's
it's
his question, we have to defend against that, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, so that's kind of, I mean, we can discuss it all, but yeah.
Okay, so you do agree that disruption is going down, but what's left, women have a higher share. Is that how I?
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, their disruption is going less, like, they're going down, but it's just less pronounced compared to males. And then I want to elaborate more like explanations of why, because I think that's the main goal of this. So let me go back here. I'm sorry, I'm not showing the slides. I'll just go back here. So we did this, and similar to this paper, large, small teams, we want to control by the size of the team. And we also found the same, that we found that larger teams are less disruptive compared to small teams. But what we found that was interesting too is like, if we control by gender, so you see all female versus 50%, and then all male, like the disruption score is still going higher, and you see it's just much higher regardless of the size of the team.
Yeah, when you say small team, I'm thinking 2 people,
2 people, right?
is that what it is?
Yeah. And also the complexity of having more than 8 researchers. So this starts going just like more noisy as we have 10 female researchers all together working on the paper. But yeah. So we have 2, 3, 4, and a little similar to what that paper presents. So we also see here that we try to evaluate the disruption progression based on the age of each one of these researchers. So we calculate the average career age in that particular team, and also what we found here is that all female teams, they have more disruptive work and earlier stages of their careers. Like in the sense, here you see for all female teams, the average is 12.34 years compared to 50%, which is 14, and for all male, is usually 17. I think part of this is that we know that in general, like the careers of female researchers is much shorter than male careers. So that could be also affected by this. We try to do some of this kind of robustness checks. So for example, here, what we're showing is like, let's kind of to filter, and going back to the questions, like, let's try to see by the citation number, by how many citations this paper has. So for the top papers that you see here on the top, like in those green lines, this kind of difference starts getting smaller. So overall, when we're just taking here the less cited papers, you see that we still have a lot of disruptive work on both sides. So it's like all male versus all female, but that difference starts getting smaller once we try to find these very high cited papers. So that was something interesting, and the idea here is that the question is like, why is this happening, especially in that kind of very high tier where we have a lot of cited work? One thing what we found here is that while male researchers get more citations than women, we saw the opposite for papers that are read by female researchers. So here what I'm sharing is we're taking the top 5% of the most cited papers in this data set, and then we're comparing against the top 5 most disruptive papers. So you see here the red line, it kind of shows what we know that male, or like in this case, male majority teams tend to be more cited than women. And you see here, work that is led by all female, it's less cited compared to the other team compositions. But you see here, like it's kind of this kind of W shape in which both extremes are able to generate more disruptive work, but female researchers are able to do it much higher than men. We did this analysis, and I think a question is, what happens with the top 5% of, like if we combine those two, so the most cited papers and also the most disruptive paper. We did analysis, but the problem is, if we try that kind of intersection, you have only 5% of teams that are only all female researchers. In that sense, science has been led by male researchers for a long time. So we tried to list to see how this could be explained by other groups. We did this to by comparing different fields. So like we have science and engineering, which this was also the taxonomy that the small arch team paper did. So you can see here that the results are consistent, like the disruption is going up for female teams. It's starting going down for when we consider social sciences, and this difference disappears when we just take arts and humanities. The only thing here is like the proportions of the data sets are very different. So most of the papers are in this side, and here there are differences. And then also I would like to know better and learn more from this field. So it's like how the norms are operating in terms of citation and work and distribution. We did this too based on different fields. So here what we did is we normalized each one of the fields based on like the average disruption score in each field. And you can see here, this kind of W shapes that start showing up all the time. So like the most disruptive field for female is medicine, and it's followed by computer science. So still like we see these patterns in which probably what it flattens is some of those social sciences, but then probably there are some differences that are not so evident. We tested this with the number of female researchers in each field, and we didn't find any correlation. So having more female researchers in one field doesn't mean that the field will be more disruptive or higher.
By more do you mean as a fraction of the total? Right?
Yeah, so with this, because for example, one example was psychology. Psychology is like 49% of like they have female researchers versus computer science like 25. But still like they were able to have average scores that were similar. So here, let me go here. I was just like, we did this also with the patents. So the problem with patents is that the number of teams or like inventors that only female researchers, you can see here the numbers, 0.9%. So it's very hard, and with at least one female inventor, it's like 19.8. So what we decided to do here is like we took just one set of patents, which at that time MBO was just making this classification. So we took drugs and medical, which they have seen more differences in terms of if they are female inventors or male inventors. So we also saw some, you see there's more noise here, but basically the trend is going up as well because the inventions that are happening that are covering more needs that female researchers have been able to address and work on. So I want to jump in here, which I think this is the main part, I think the most interesting, like why is this happening? So again, we don't have any causal explanation with this because it's data analysis, but we're trying to do some analysis with this. So one idea is that female researchers have worked on topics that are usually overlooked. And I'm going to share a story. Like my wife got pregnant a few months ago, and she was I mean, the doctors were telling us if men would get pregnant, a lot of these things would have been solved by centrism, right?
Yeah.
Because in that sense, a lot of things that have been overlooked historically, right now there's more women in the field, and now we have more opportunities to explore these problems, right? So that's one idea, and you've seen like there are more inventions in aspects like women's health and so on, and those are led by female researchers. Another case, and again, related to that, inventor teams are more prone to inventing patent folks than women. And also, we know that there are different ways in that majorities and minorities play out depending on the status, and also like if it's male dominated versus female. So usually, at least from previous studies, when there's one man alone, it's just like the voice and like interactions will be different when it's a woman. So that could also affect how ideas emerge, how the conversations go back. And a lot of researchers also have shown like female minorities tend to participate less in discussions, brainstorm less ideas, have lower willingness to lead a team, and so on. And again, those are probably for some of the systematic differences that have been in science in the industry. And the last thing, and this is a little connected with the collective intelligence studies, what they have shown is like when we have more women, there are more willingness to just have a more egalitarian style, to have conversations and to share information. So that could be also part of it. So based on these ideas, we're trying to do some analysis that could test this kind of assertions. So what we did here first, right?
Just something popped into my mind. You know, I completely agree with this idea of, you know, open collaboration help. But doesn't that suggest that more diversity on the team is good?
Oh, yeah, right. But and also I thought the same. So like if we have both visions together, why there are no more ideas, right? And again, without having any causal explanation on this, but my question is, it's just because you have 50-50, and then who exercises the majority? When things come up with different ones, like maybe it's the PI, maybe it's the person who brought the funding, I don't know. But I'm just curious too, why, for example, when we have majority led, other dynamics play out just because they could decide on what they're going to do or work together, versus like having 50-50, in which probably there could be more discussion, but are they able to create more ideas together? So I have the same question, and I haven't tested.
Yeah, it's kind of a puzzle because it sounds like you're saying that homogeneity is the best thing if you want disruption, not person. Am I getting that wrong?
I feel like I'm trying to lean that way too. It's just like if it's a matter of having, let's say, there should be a team led by female researchers, period, not involve any men, but it's just because the problems that we're going to address are so completely different and we don't need men for
I
this.
see. All right, that's awesome.
I guess, well, you mentioned this question of diversity versus homogeneity, and I recall there being some studies in education where you get better outcomes from minority ethnicities if they are being taught by someone of the same ethnicity. And it's hard, and there's explanations for why that is. I don't know what we do with that in terms of constructing teams, because I don't think it's realistic to silo all. But I'm curious whether some of that, that literature base would be useful for interpreting this result.
Right. No, yeah, that's a good point, because I think that's the main question. It's like how the majority, I mean, in that sense, like even you have this individual who have like all that knowledge, but how that information sharing or like enable this person just to feel empowered, it could play in different ways. I appreciate all the questions.
I haven't seen you in a while.
Yes,
Oh.
right, we can talk, I can talk more after, I don't want to dominate Diego's talk.
Anyhow, but some of the fields off thinking,
Oh,
right?
there are fields I have, I mean, I
Medicine,
didn't see.
psychology, maybe over, psychology, more. At least for these graduates.
I'm going to share
I mean,
this.
this could be like a totally fantastic way to help us think about this differently. I'm just curious to reconcile it in my own mind.
So we didn't find any field I have more than 60%, like, okay, you have a lot of female researchers. You see here, this is what we did. So the field percentage, sorry, the percentage of female researchers in each field, and this is like the normalized score. So you see what I was saying in like psychology, sociology, you see those in social science have more female, but also you see here computer science, which is like lower, but it has or like normalized higher disruptions. So I don't believe it's a matter of like, oh, because there are more women in this field, that makes a difference. So let me go back here. So what we did here, and again, thanks to CSSI, because we learned all about what they were doing. So what we took was, we took the abstracts of the most disruptive papers for both all female, all male. And what we're trying to do here is like create a representation using the abstracts. So we created web embeddings using Inspector 2. And the idea here was to see how kind of close or distance were these papers, right? So try to see if they actually were working on things that were similar or different. So you can see here, like in medicine, there are many papers, there are many areas in which actually they are dominated by female, that they're working on those areas. And if we are capable of zooming, a lot of this work comes from pregnancy, issues related to women's health, nurturing, a lot also caregiving. So there are a lot of work that has been emerging in the last few decades, and again, have been led by female researchers. At the same time, you see that other kind of work that has been led by male, and I put in this picture here because it's history, and you can see here like there's no clear kind of a silo or like a kind of special costume. And again, every field has different ways, different norms. So you see here that there's no clarity just about there is one particular topic in which female researchers are like leading to. We did this too with other fields, so it could be based on the topics, but also, and this is something that Cossette's crew like published a few years ago, just about in computer science, there are specific subfields like there are more female researchers working on this. So we can also see here, like even computer science is dominated by male researchers. There are some areas in which female researchers have taken the lead. So I'm just reading the papers here, using multi-meter stereotypes towards an understanding of the role experience of the evolution of the novice, an introduction to case-based research. So these are papers that, if we go into detail, maybe there are some fields like software engineer, human-computer interaction. While at least from this paper, what we learned, like a lot of other topics like theory of computing and so on have been led by me. Chemistry the same. I'm not a chemist, so like I don't know too much about, and that's what I would love to hear more. It's like why there are specific areas in which probably there are more women working on those compared to men. Another, and I'm going back to your question. So another possible explanation is that it's about the leadership of the team, right? So what we're trying to do here, and this was like evident idea, is that if we have the most senior person in this team leading or just like exercising some kind of influence, what if we identify who is the leader based on gender and see the differences in terms of description? So what we did here is like we took the person, like that team with the highest H index, which represents like how many papers have decided recently, and trying to separate for all the team compositions when a team was led by a female versus led by a male. And that's what we found too. It's just like when the team is led by a female researcher, at least with the highest, the most tenured person here, is a female, like also the average scores of the disruption goes up. You can see here, and that goes with when the male majority is here. So for example, maybe there's one woman, two women here, and then you have here like a lot of women, but there's only one man, and there could be different combinations, right? Like let's say there's the PI working with a lot of female PhD students, right? So even in those cases across different positions, when the highest H index is a woman, like the scores of the disruption go high. The last thing I want to share is that another question could be, and I have received this question, it's about survival bias. So you have heard this idea like women who work very hard, like they have to work twice as men in order to stay active. Like it could be a possibility like there's a big survival bias that only the best of the best stay, and that's why we can trigger more innovation and so on. So what we did here is like we calculate the average alpha career for all, in this case, researchers who were working on female teams who were very disruptive versus those who were just working in developmental work. So what we found here is that even that it's true that these researchers who are very disruptive tend to be longer in academia, but you can see here that it's not different from men either. So like even men who are very disruptive, very creative, tend to stay longer in academia. And even more than those peers you see here, like males who are working on developmental work, they're not doing disruptive. So it's not true in that sense that women, like, it's just a survival effect, like just because there are so few working on these fields, that could explain why this difference. So we're optimistic in that sense that whatever works they can produce, it's just also because of their merits as well as like the kind of work and areas that are discovered. So I know that we have 15 minutes, so I want to kind of conclude here with some more takeaways. And I'm trying to be very careful given the current environment, you know. So we want to interpret these results very not based on causality, because we cannot claim whatever. If you have more female researchers in your team, that makes the team more disruptive. That's not the topic is not. So we see like a lot of these female majority teams, what they have been doing is just like they have been building new research areas. And that's kind of like this disruption metric is kind of showing. Just like there has been a new path, there's like many strands of literature that are new, they have been overlooked for a long time. And now because there are more women participating in science, we are seeing like how these topics are emerging more and more over time. So in that sense, it's interesting that what we're seeing is like male majority teams have been tending just to work on developmental research. So it's like building from previous work or just like extending and making it bigger compared to female who have had more opportunities to create new areas of research. So I think it's important for policy makers to think about, and I go back to your question, Brian, it's like it's about just trying to put or create a balanced team or just would you encourage one kind of team. I think that's the main question that I haven't answered. And I would like to see more of this, just like what in terms of policies we can try to promote. Just like it's a matter of like there are specific topics that we should encourage certain gender compositions or so on. Or like if we are trying to encourage more disruptive, like new areas, new paths of discovery versus deepening our current knowledge. So how that could play out given the gender composition. So the last part, and I think going back to the question of metrics, we know that women are less citated compared to men. That's has been tested. There's a lot of evidence of that. So we were interested to see, okay, if this could be something to be used as another metric, right? So in that sense, if we're thinking of if women are just creating new knowledge, or like at least these teams are able to expand our knowledge, which is very hard to tell just by looking at the numbers of citations, right? So you have seen in the over past decades, like there are new areas or new fields or subfields that are emerging naturally, or like even that's increasing participation of female researchers. So what if we can try to see this as a way to measure if in case of maybe female don't have enough recognition, and I hope they could have it more in the future, but also we can also use this kind of metric to understand like their contributions have been played in another field, right? Like have been not about getting more work in going big in terms of developing more research that has existed, but their role has been opening new doors or new questions that are important for science. So I think that's something that we could discuss more. So in that sense, if we discuss this with my students, like basically, are we thinking of maybe disruption could be one thing to evaluate or not when we're trying to see researchers' role and in order to opening new questions and so on. So there's a big issue in disruption. Also, one thing is like how it's calculated. You need to wait a lot of years in order to see if a paper is disruptive or not. So that's an interesting question too. But I think overall the takeaway here is that female researchers, at least from this analysis, we can see that they have taken the lead in opening new research areas, which are very important for the humanity as well as for science. So again, limitations. One is the disruption scores. I took complete knowledge that that's an issue, and right now they're opening more sources. Like we use SciSciNet formula. We're testing this now with other formulas that are like more available in the databases. We also use a binary gender classification. And also the names were associated by this algorithm, which again, it's ideally we'll have, if we have self-reported data, I know that NSF, every time that a student graduates, asks this question, so maybe that could be something that we can take on. But still, and then we want to see more causal analysis of this, because ideally we could try to test these ideas, like, and I think this is what the collective intelligence studies are trying to do too. It's just like, what happens if we can control the number of female researchers or the female participants and see if actually they can be more creative or less creative when we have different team compositions. So I think that's important. And again, I think the consequences are mostly to understand how new research areas are being developed, also how we are funded, and also how we are able to enable female researchers to have the recognition that historically they deserve. So again, thank you again. This is the summary. And if you want the preprint, I can send it to you. It's under review, so that's why it's not public yet. But yeah, happy to share with you. And we have 9 minutes for questions. But yeah, thank you all.
Just for clarification before people get into the specifics. I'm a little puzzled. The disruption index is primarily based on citations, right?
Correct.
So by that index, your studies show that emails are winning. So winning, they're getting more. I mean, they're overrepresented in terms of disruptive papers. How does that square with your kind of foundational observation that women are undercited?
So the problem with this metric, and connect to the questions here. So the thing with disruption is like it counts the network citation, so like who cites who. But the problem here is that it rewards those who, this is my work. And then if everyone puts attention to me and starts forgetting what it was done before, then I get higher scores. So in that sense, people who get less cited get also less disruption scores. But the only way to get more disruption is like, okay, if his paper is actually enabled to break the line, so everyone forgets what has done before, and then we can see new areas where like everyone is referencing to this paper. So the relationship is non-linear in that sense, like more citations, both more disruption. There is something like it's a negative correlation. So I believe that it's true that, I mean, women have been cited less compared to male, given some co-founders. But what we've tried to intensify here is because they're opening new areas of research, and those are like bringing new discussions, or at least they're citing those papers rather than the previous ones. That's like what is benefiting them. So to answer, I don't think that if citation should matter, like it's not counterintuitive. What I think is just like trying to, I think makes sense in the sense of they're less cited, but maybe in the sense of who cites these people, because maybe the 10 people who are citing this paper are paying all the attention to this one rather than having 1,000 people who are citing your paper, but also are citing all the work that you have done before, or like the people who came before you. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, sort of. Then I guess I'll ask one quicker one. I'm not sure citations is the real, I'm a chemist, okay? H index over 100, many companies, etc. So some of this doesn't square with my own experience, but citations don't square in many of our views with real innovation. If you have a very innovative paper, it's cited much less because people don't understand it. It threatens the direction the field is moving in, etc. Right. Publishing the next exciting step in a mature area is the way to get best citations. Patents seem to me to be a much more relevant measure of doing something new. I don't fully understand your conclusion that women are more likely to be doing new things and men are more likely to be doing more of the same, 8th decimal place type of work. Patents, you can't get a patent if it's the 8th decimal place, okay? It's got to be something not already in the prior art. And so when again, my own experience, including as vice president of research here, overseeing the whole patenting operation, doesn't square with that. So I don't know what I'm missing. I mean, I respect the work you've done, and some of these insights are really interesting and I think worthy of a lot of pondering and discussion. But they seem to me to be quite detached from at least my experience, and maybe I'm the problem.
No,
But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. So that's again, I completely agree and follow. And I think a little bit weird because if you're the disruption metric, because what it's trying to capture is like if you see in perspective if this work was relevant or it's like start a new area of research. And what we know is that in order to see that takes probably 10 years, and they call it this effect of the sleeping beauty. Maybe that idea is there, no one is citing it, it's there, but then at a certain point it starts just getting more interesting, or like people start referencing to it. And this is one of the main issues of these disruptive papers. Like they require a lot of time, and James Evans published a paper related to this, like an average like 9 years. So we can say, oh, this work actually changed the course of the knowledge. So I agree in that sense, patents, it's more quick in that sense, right? It's a long process in terms of validation and so on, and just to get a patent, the patent. I have no patents to so in that sense my experience little, but that seems more practical, and that I agree that could be a better indicator. What we're trying to do here is just, okay, if we follow this exercise, we couldn't find patents that have all the female researchers or female inventors, right? And I think also that's another problem that has been discussed for a long time. Like women patentless. Why? There could be structural differences, it could be in terms of the fields and so on. The closest thing we could do is just like we take drugs and medicine, and there was a paper from Barbasha's group, like they were trying to say, yeah, like in that sense, patents created for women, they were like related to women's health issues. Those were led by female researchers. So that's kind of like trying to opening the question is, it's just because right now they have more power, they have all the resources, and they have an opportunity to start working on those projects. Like probably 30 years ago, no one cared. So again, I don't kind of make any causal mechanical conclusions here, but I think that's how we're trying to figure out this one. Thank you. Yeah.
Did you control the team size when we observe a W-shaped plot?
Yeah, we control the team size because one thing is that going back to the point, female teams are much smaller compared to men. So that correlation was around 20%, not too big, but yeah, like that's a fair concept. Like in the end, female researchers tend to work smaller, and we know the smaller teams also have more stress. Right.
I had one just a conceptual question that goes back to what Milan asked about sugar funding. And the question is, what is an optimal level of disruptive papers? You can't have science like being thrown into chaos week after week,
Right. Yeah.
or month after month, or even year after year. And so, if disruption is going down, maybe that just reflects more of the complexity of science. You need to find different avenues of research. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Right. Or maybe having more disruptive papers, ironically, could be bad for areas to grow, because you can't take root in any common set of denominators that allow you to build. So now it's kind of like, what do we do, in your opinion? What is the right level of disruptive papers?
I remember seeing this from Funk's group also, like they were trying to go there and then in the discussion. So it's about, because they know theory, you cannot disrupt it, right? Just like you cannot come up with 10 new theories every, right? Like the theories are building all the theories. Methods is what it seems that goes or has more validity in order to be disruptive. If this method is doing something new, like again, resolving a problem better than it has done before, I think that's kind of the spirit, for example, something like Transformers, right? Like Transformers, like in NLP, right? Because right now, who's talking about parts of the speech? Or like all the stuff that we learn from NLP time ago. Like it's statistical, right? Right now we're talking about Transformers. So I agree. And I think the question is like, what kind of contribution should be more relevant to be assessed as disruptive? They suggest that it should be mostly tools, methods, because we still need to ground in theories or like previous knowledge, even data sets. Like data sets are built from previous data. So I agree, it doesn't have to be something so generic. And I hope like that could be the question that we'll have for this years. I know that we're running out of time, so I let you, if anyone wants to talk with me, happy to chat.
One more
I
question.
think one more.
Go ahead.
Sure, I'll jump in, I guess this gets at kind of, I'm curious, this is more of a meta question in the sense of, you know, we do this research looking at how teams are formed. And you can imagine people acting in bad faith, trying to take the wrong lessons out of that. And I'm curious whether you have any perspective on how you try to present the research so that you can. So that you don't, so we don't end up with people taking, you can't control their people, but.
Right. And I know that even Linkfake, like who published this paper of remote collaboration, like there was actually a news article took it in the worst way, like remote work sucks. So there could be many takeaways from this read in the wrong way. So I'm trying to be careful here. It's like again, it's just not saying that one is better than the other. It's just like even like different roles that scientists are doing. So how historically men have been, male majority teams have been doing things, while female researchers have been doing other things. Could be exploring more versus exploiting more. And that's, I think, what I'm trying to do here. All right, thank you guys.